late June 1756, the people of Albany, New York, extended a warm welcome to John Campbell, Earl of Loudoun. Loudoun had come to Albany to turn the French and Indian War in Great Britain's favor. The Albanians also hoped that he would lessen their troubles with the drunken and disorderly soldiers who disrupted their community. If the Albanians' welcome impressed Loudoun, he did not show it. Instead, he called the city magistrates to a meeting where he informed them that he had certain powers, and that as a civilian body, the corporation would not always understand or like what he must order his army to do. Loudoun wasted little time in demonstrating his unpopular powers. Between 1756 and 1763, Loudoun and his successors forcibly quartered their soldiers in the Albanians' private homes. The French and Indian War greatly altered the Albanians' way of life. The war brought the British Empire into their largely autonomous community. It also precipitated the end to Albany's place at the center of the British North American fur trade. Between 1754 and 1760, thousands of British soldiers, colonial officials, merchants, and camp followers made their way to and through Albany. The war proved to be both a profitable and an antagonistic experience for the Albanians. Albanians profited from the war both financially and via the opportunity to extend their patronage networks. Merchants, tavern keepers, artisans, and laborers furnished their visitors with the supplies, housing, and services they needed. Elites rubbed elbows with aristocratic British officers. The Albanians had expected to profit from the war, but they had not anticipated the adversarial politics of identity that the war brought out. Although the Albanians claimed to be Britons, their British guests recognized them as foreigners, Dutch colonials. The British Army used this non-British view of the Albanians to justify their quartering practices. Many Albanians believed the Army's quartering practices had violated their constitutional rights as Britons, and they reflected on this when it came time to choose their loyalties during the American Revolution. The Albanians' disagreeable experiences with the British Army during the French and Indian War predisposed the community to side with, or at least not oppose, the Patriot cause. The British Army began quartering its soldiers in the Albanians' private homes on June 25, 1756. General James Abercrombie asked the Common Council to find quarters for the 42nd Highland Regiment, the Black Watch. At first, the Albanians seemed happy to lodge the soldiers as, quote, "the great many Highlanders behaved worthy to be called honest and reasonable men," end quote. However, the conduct of a few soldiers soon spoiled any pleasure the Albanians derived from assisting the army. Some of the quartered Scots, quote, "behaved like brutes in human shape, by making horrible noise in their room, threatening to oblige people to wait on them, rise at all times of the night and open their doors, insisting on the second best bed in the house, abusing and destroying the furniture, put themselves in eating the furniture. This was the general complaint." End quote. The Albanians wished to help the army, but they no longer desired to share their homes with its soldiers. Loudoun disliked quartering. He complained to friends and superiors that he faced opposition to quartering throughout the colonies. He also lamented that his need for quarters unduly taxed the Albanians' means. In a letter to the Duke of Cumberland, Loudoun reported that the Albanians, quote, "really have hardly any more beds than they lay on themselves," end quote. He assured the Duke that he was making the best of a bad situation. Quote, "In Albany, where I am obliged to quarter more troops than the people can support, or reasonably ought, I have taken nothing from the people but house room, and as they really have no beds, I have given the men palaces to lie on, and furnished them firing from the magazines, at the rate of 1 fire to 20 men, as they have in the barracks. The officers I have given money for their firing." End quote. Loudoun also insisted on paying for his own lodgings. The Albanians resented quartering for reasons beyond the inconveniences of having to share their homes with strangers. They believed that the British Army had violated their constitutional rights with its practices. First, by illegally applying the Mutiny Act of 1689, and second, by using quartering as an illegal form of punishment. Anyone who displeased the army usually found more soldiers assigned to billet in their home. The Albanians also realized that Loudoun justified his quartering practices based on his views of the Albanians as, quote, old Dutch inhabitants, Dutchmen, or simply as Dutch, end quote, foreigners, who were not entitled to the constitutional rights of Britons. Quartering played a large role in why Albany became a Patriot stronghold. The military occupation of Albany during the French and Indian War showed the Albanians what close imperial rule might mean. The army had effectively muted the Albanians' political and legal voice. British officers had interfered with the governance of their community and their ability to conduct diplomacy with the Haudenosaunee peoples. The soldiers also brought drastic demographic and economic change to the community. The British Army's victory over France redirected the center of the British fur trade to Montreal, and positive experiences in America led many British soldiers and merchants to settle in both Albany and Albany County. The Albanians struggled to adapt their society to fit the new post-war world. Although many enthusiastically embraced the opportunities the new British Empire had to offer, many more resisted and longed for a return to their mostly autonomous pre-war ways. Their treatment in the past and their frustrations with the post-war present created a long, riotous period that led many of Albanians to embrace the American Revolution. During the 1760s, the Albanians' outrage with the British Army dovetailed with the broader colonial movement for equal subjectship. After the war, the Albanians unleashed their pent-up frustrations by participating in 8 demonstrations against the army and British authority. The riots began in May 1763, when the Common Council requested that the British Army remove all of its buildings from the city's streets and all spots of ground where the inhabitants needed use of the land. Colonel John Bradstreet rebuffed this application. Bradstreet's refusal outraged many Albanians. The city of Albany had owned the land prior to the war. The corporation had loaned the land to the army to support the war effort. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 had ended the war, and the city not only wanted, but needed its land back to support the post-war population boom. Around May 23, 1763, Mayor Volkert P. Dow led a group of protesters to the army storehouse, where they pulled down its fence. This action served as the first salvo in a 5-year campaign to recover city lands and demonstrate frustration over British authority. Between 1763 and 1767, Albanians participated in 5 riots, or mob actions, that tried to tear down dilapidated military buildings on city-owned property. Albanians also attacked members of the army on 2 occasions in 1764. In the first incident, 2 intoxicated lieutenants attempted to gain entry into a house where, quote, they had some female acquaintance, end quote. A fight erupted when the woman called out to her neighbors for help. The situation devolved into a violent street brawl that involved at least a dozen grenadiers, several soldiers, and, quote, a mob of about 200 Albanians, end quote. 7 months later, 2 Albanians beat a sentry who disrespected them. By January 1766, it became clear to the Albanians that Britons throughout North America shared their frustrations with British authority. In 1763, Parliament began to tax the colonists to pay for their protection and for the French and Indian War. Many colonists argued that Parliament had illegally taxed them with its Sugar Act of 1764, Stamp Act of 1765, and townshend duties of 1767, because the colonists did not have direct representation in that body. The Albanians disliked the taxation measures as well. They interpreted these measures as an indication that Parliament intended to rule the British colonies more directly than they had before the war. In January 1766, the Albanians' riots converged with the wider colonial movement against parliamentary taxation. In January, the Albanians protested the Stamp Act, an action that combined their protestations against the British Army with their disapproval of parliamentary taxation. For 2 days, the Albany Sons of Liberty hounded Henry Van Schack, based on rumors that he had applied for the position of Albany's stamp distributor. At first, the protesters tried to intimidate Van Schack with their number. They requested that Van Schack appear before them in Thomas Williams's tavern, where nearly 40 men greeted him. Although Van Schack assured the gathering that, quote, he had never applied for that office, end quote, the assembled men insisted that he renounce the stamp distributorship and swear an oath that he would never apply for the position. When Van Schack refused to take the oath, the Sons of Liberty honored their threat to destroy his property. In an effort to avoid the Sons' threat to destroy his person, Van Schack relented and took the oath. In 1767, the Albanians got what they wanted. Thomas Gage ordered the army to vacate Albany. For the first time in its history, Albany did not have a military force occupying it. However, after the army left, the Albanians found that they could not return to their pre-war past. Their society had changed, and the imperial crisis continued to intensify. The escalation of the imperial crisis forced the Albanians to make a decision. Geography dictated, and history had demonstrated, that either a colonial or British army would occupy their city during a war. Negative experiences with the British army during the previous war, and Parliament's post-war attempts to impose a stricter imperial rule, predisposed a majority of the Albanians to side with the Patriots. Statistically, Albany stood as a Patriot stronghold. Between 1775 and 1781, the Albany Committee of Safety, the Schenectady Committee of Correspondence, and the Albany County Commissioners for Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies interviewed 2,057 suspected loyalists. During that time, these boards found 87 loyalists living in the city of Albany, 4.2% of all persons accused of loyalty throughout Albany County. Of those 87, only 26 turned out to be bona fide loyalists. These numbers reflect that the committees investigated approximately 3% of Albanians for loyalism, and that true loyalism accounted for just 0.87% of Albany's population. Undoubtedly, many of the suspected loyalists were actually people who tried not to choose sides. Men, like Henry Van Schack, tried to remain neutral in an effort to keep their political and economic options open, no matter which side won the war. Albany Patriots distrusted men like Van Schack and kept a close watch on anyone who did not outwardly support their cause. According to Van Schack, the Patriots deemed anyone with, quote, a mere difference of political sentiment as disaffected, end quote. Van Schack related the perils of trying to live in Albany as a neutral. He reported that the Committee of Safety fined, imprisoned, and banished any individual who spoke, quote, disrespectfully of the Whigs in general, discouraging or unbecoming talk against the American cause, disapprobation of the measure they, the Whigs, were pursuing, diminutively of the authority of Congress, end quote, or those who refused to sign the General or Continental Association. Residents of the city of Albany had to support the Patriots or adopt a quiet life devoid of vocal political opinions, as tight quarters and the power of the Albany Committee made it easy to detect and punish loyalists, or those who approved the Patriots' politics and actions. Unable to return to their pre-war lives, many Albanians embraced the revolution as an opportunity to create a new life. This new life looked slightly different for each patriot. Men like Philip Schuyler supported the revolution because they had lost their voice in the colonial assembly, and they believed that the revolution would launch them into positions of greater power. Men like Abraham Yates Jr. used the revolution as an opportunity to level political power between men of middling means and the elite. Men without political designs or ambitions looked upon the Revolution as a chance to help ensure that no army ever forcibly quartered or dictated the governance of their community again. Although reasons for joining the Patriot cause differed for each patriot, they all shared two common aspects. The Revolution offered Patriot Albanians the opportunity to vent their frustrations with the unexpected and drastic changes the French and Indian War had brought to their community, and the chance to directly affect social, political, and economic changes that they found more palatable. Thank you.